Okay, so imagine this. You wake up on January 3rd, 2026, and the biggest news story on the planet is that the United States has just launched a major military strike inside Venezuela. Now, this was something that had been threatened for months, sure, but almost nobody thought it would actually happen. So in this explainer, we're going to break down exactly how this all went down and what it means for the rest of the world.
And then, in an early morning post, President Trump himself confirms it. And the target? Well, it wasn't just some military sites. No, the target was the country's leader, President Nicolas Maduro himself.
You can imagine this announcement sent immediate shockwaves around the globe. It raised these huge questions about international law, the balance of power, and really the future of an entire nation. So let's start right at the beginning. How exactly did this completely unprecedented event unfold?
Right, so the mission had a code name, of course, Operation Absolute Resolve. And this thing was a complex, meticulously planned strike that brought together cyber warfare, airstrikes, and a lightning-fast assault on the ground.
U.S. officials are saying that elite Delta Force commandos were right at the tip of the spear. Their mission was crystal clear: capture Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores. And this part is key. Both of them were already facing U.S. charges for narco-terrorism, and that's the legal justification the White House is using for this entire operation.
So here's the play-by-play of how it all went down. Late Friday night, the president gives the green light. Just a few hours later, bam, a massive air assault begins, hitting key defense sites around Caracas. Then, the lights in the city go dark. The president later called this a certain expertise that we have. And in that darkness, the ground team moved in. They breached the compound, and according to officials, they got to Maduro just moments before he could have reached a reinforced safe room. The entire on-site capture? It took less than 3 minutes. Unbelievable.
So with Maduro now in U.S. custody, the focus immediately pivots to, okay, what's next? And that's when the messaging coming out of Washington started to get, well, a little complicated. It really revealed a potential rift in the strategy.
And the contrast here was stark. I mean, really stark. On one hand, you have President Trump being completely unequivocal, saying the U.S. is going to run the country and get its oil industry flowing again. But then, shortly after, his own Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, seems to walk that back. He clarified that, no, the U.S. would not take on a data governing role, but would instead enforce an oil quarantine on tankers. I mean, those are two very different visions for the U.S. role here. And it really raises the question, was the strategy fully baked?
Now, as you can probably guess, the reaction from the international community and the financial markets was immediate, and it was dramatic.
The international condemnation came in fast, and frankly, it was harsh. Russia, China, and Iran, all of them allies of the Maduro regime, were furious. They called it an illegal act of aggression. And it wasn't just them. Even the United Nations Secretary General chimed in, expressing deep concern that the fundamental rules of international law just hadn't been respected.
And the financial markets? Whoa, they reacted in a heartbeat. Defense stocks, like BAE Systems, jumped on the expectation of more conflict to come. U.S. oil companies, like Chevron, surged at the prospect of maybe getting to move into Venezuela's absolutely massive oil fields. And perhaps the most telling sign of all? Venezuelan government bonds, which had been pretty much worthless, spiked over 20%. And why? Well, investors were suddenly gambling that a new government might actually pay off the country's debt. Amidst all of this, investors also did what they always do in a crisis. They ran for safety. The price of gold, the classic safe haven asset, shot up over 2%, hitting $4,420 an ounce. That's a huge, clear signal of just how much anxiety this sent through the global economy.
Okay, so back in the United States, this operation immediately ignited a fierce constitutional debate. And the big question was this: did the president even have the authority to do this? At the very heart of this argument is something called the War Powers Resolution of 1973. Now, this law was designed for one specific reason: to stop presidents from going to war without getting approval from Congress first. I mean, after all, the U.S. Constitution gives Congress, not the president, the power to declare war.
So the debate really boils down to two completely opposite arguments. The Trump administration is claiming this wasn't an act of war at all, but more of a law enforcement operation to arrest an indicted fugitive, kind of like capturing a terrorist leader. They argue that telling Congress beforehand would have risked leaks and totally endangered the mission. But critics are saying, no way. They see a massive military strike to remove a head of state as a clear act of war, one that absolutely required congressional authorization. As Senator Tim Kaine put it very bluntly, this was an illegal war.
So while all these legal and political battles are raging in Washington, the most urgent question is actually on the ground in Caracas. With Maduro gone, who is actually in charge of Venezuela?
Right now, there are basically three competing claims to power. First, you've got what's left of Maduro's government. The country's Supreme Court has ordered Vice President Delcy Rodriguez to take over. Second, you have the political opposition, who are demanding that Edmundo González Urrutia, the man widely seen as the real winner of the 2024 election, be installed as president. And then there's the United States, with President Trump declaring that America itself will temporarily run the country. Yeah, that is a recipe for some profound instability.
Meanwhile, the man at the very center of all of this, Nicolas Maduro, is thousands of miles away. He and his wife are being held in a federal detention center in Brooklyn, where they're awaiting trial on charges of turning Venezuela into a full-blown narco state. His rule is over.
So where does all this leave us? On one hand, the operation itself was a stunning display of military precision. A leader accused of narco-terrorism is now going to face justice. But on the other hand, the U.S. acted without Congress and against international law, and it's left a very dangerous power vacuum in a country that sits on the world's largest oil reserves. All of which leads to one final critical question. A dictator has been removed, but who gets to decide what comes next?